Hello and welcome everyone back to another episode of Doctors Schuster and Oxley, The Power of Stories. With my friend once again, my friend, writing collaborator and co-host Helmut Schuster. Our guest today is Noel Ifeanyi Alumona. I have had the opportunity to rehearse that name for 3 or 4 years now. I first met Noel back in 2023. And actually, in a way, I think that's a nice intro to this particular podcast because I thought Helmut and I were writing a book. We were looking to try and find people to contribute to that book. The book was the legendary Career Carol. It was our first book, our first attempt to write a book. And we wanted to try and get people to contribute to it, to provide their own stories, to try and amplify some of the theory that we were talking about and to try and bring it to life. And Helmut said, why don't we interview Noel? I had never met Noel. And I remember preparing for our interview, thinking about it to some extent as a task, something that showed up in the calendar. And I suspect Noel thought it the same way. There was a calendar entry. He was going to meet this
Mhm.
strange person, and I was meeting someone I hadn't met. And it's a task. I've got to check it off. And I can't help but to think how that, in a way, is how we approach professional life most of the time. I look at my calendar for the next day and I say, I've got all these tasks and all these meetings. And gosh, if I can just get through to the end of the day, then I can do something fun and interesting. So if you frame it that way, to some extent, it becomes something of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Tasks that you do at work become somewhat boring and monotonous, in part because we've decided that they're going to be boring and monotonous before we've even started them. And I have to thank Noel because Noel jolted me out of that. When we met and had our interview, I was fascinated by our interview. It was a standout conversation of 2023 for me. It was one of the things that really struck me. We got into a discussion about professional life and what really matters and how you stay away from getting sort of dragged into the monotony of it. And the first thing he said to me was, find time to stop, pause, meditate on where you choose to spend your time and focus in on what gives you power and energy. And he was talking about what had given him power in his life to release himself from the monotony and do something that had real meaning for him. And it was so engaging. There was a point in the conversation when we talked about moral truth or moral jeopardy. And this is the thing that has stayed with me, the gift that he gave me at the time, which is the difficulty of being vulnerable at work, of this question of truth. And I was saying it's very hard in professional life, I think, to be forthright with people about what you really want, because you fear that they're going to judge you for it, that they might look at you in a different light. And it's therefore tempting to be guarded. And one of the things that Noel said was, he said, the truth is very important, but not everyone automatically deserves the truth. They have to earn the right for the truth. And I love that. I still to this day use that as a sort of framing of how professional life and our vulnerable selves have to confront these issues of how much do we disclose of ourselves to people that we've only just met or we don't know what their motivations are. So in a way, my introduction to the podcast is just simply to say it's amazing when you leave yourself open to the possibility of something inspiring you, as opposed to close the door and just treat it as a task. I was delighted with the conversation and the effect that the conversation I had with Noel had with me. And I'm reminded a little bit, would like to share any opportunity for me to throw in a quote from Marcel Proust seems like a good opportunity, doesn't it? He said the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And I think my illustration of that is that's to some extent what happened when I had the conversation with Noel. I saw something that I hadn't seen before. He helped me put new spectacles on to see the world. Helmut, over to you. To some extent, you suggested that we interview Noel for our book, so you must have had some foresight that this might have happened. This strange alchemy. What's your impression of this
Yeah,
notion of serendipity when you meet people and you're open to learning something new?
yeah. I think the issue of serendipity is probably very true. I still remember when I met Noel for the first time. It was in New York. It was 1 year before you met Noel, and it was at the AFS Youth Assembly. Noel was a participant, but he also was participating in the AFS Global Citizen Award. And so there's a lineup of judges. There's a lineup of the finalists of like 7 people at the time, I think it was. And, like the jury, had the privilege to be part of the jury, and you listen to the pitches, and suddenly Noel enters, and it was very different. Yeah, we were not expecting what he did, and at the end, I think there was not even a question in our mind that he should be the winner of this very prestigious award. And you became the winner. It was 2022. And I think it was anonymous, and there was no question. And I think we had a moment. We really had a moment as a jury. I think we had a moment at the Youth Assembly. And I still remember, and that's why I said to David, I think we really should have a conversation with Noel for our first book, and it was a privilege having you. Your dream has always been to go back to the United States. I'm privileged to I think probably you reached out to me and said I'm finally made it, and so congratulations to that. And again, I mean, your life, your journey is inspiration, and I think audience will think so too.
Yes, I think, Noel, welcome to the podcast. Helmut's going to ask you some cunningly simple but equally complicated questions. We'll see how you fare, just as a means by which to introduce you to our audience. So over to you.
For those, I mean, most people probably have never heard or basically seen or followed Noel. Some of our audience might have. But Noel, for me, the question is, you have met very, very prominent, well-known leaders in your life. And my question is, who is the person who inspired you the most? And the list is long and the
Present
list is
company accepted.
important. Yep. So would be very much interested. I don't know that.
Yeah, that's a very tricky question, but I think it also offers it offers me an opportunity to also talk about one of the leaders who has continued to inspire me. And I think I would also love to mention another leader passively, but I think I am so inspired by the life of the Dalai Lama, whom I met in India in 2023. And because I had followed his work and his preaching about peace and the importance of peace in our world, the world has become really polarized at the moment. And I think what the Dalai Lama had always preached about, the importance of peace and unity for communities and for the world generally, continues to resonate with me. So I do think that it was a great opportunity getting to chat about my experiences with the Dalai Lama for a couple of days in India. But that experience has also continued to help me, improve on my work and redefine uh, the everyday experiences that surround the boys and men that I work with at Boys Champions. So, but passively was a leader that I met in 2018, Barack Obama in Johannesburg. I am an Obama Foundation Fellow, and that offered me an opportunity to get to meet with Barack in 2018 in Johannesburg. And I had a brief moment with Barack, and one of the questions that he asked me was, Noel, what are you planning to do for young people in Nigeria? And that conversation stayed with me. And that conversation also bettered the work that we do currently with young people at Boys Champion. So you see, there's a whole lot of moving from inspiration to action from these leaders that I connected with in the past.
Excellent. Yeah. So that actually leads me to the second question. Yeah. And this the question really is, I mean, you created something amazing with the Boys Champions. Yeah. What was actually the hardest thing you faced with this charity? Because you're extremely successful. What is the biggest hurdle or thing you have to overcome to make it a success?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and I do think that a lot of people encounter different difficulties based on their context and the type of work that they do. But for me at Boys Champions, one of the biggest challenges that I experienced was getting people to buy into the work, because we are addressing the problem of, violence against women and girls through a different lens that was never part of the conversation from the beginning, right? In the past 3 decades, we've seen that so much attention around gender equality conversations or ending violence against women and girls have more been focused on empowering women and girls. Nobody has really thought about calling the men who are most of the times, from experiences and based on data, the perpetrators of some of these acts, right? Nobody has thought about calling the men and the boys in to become part of the process of, creating the solution. Nobody has seen boys and men as part of the solution. Instead, boys and men were actually framed as the problem. And I was responding to this through this lens. So a lot of people really didn't understand what I was doing from the beginning. And people were like, some of the, resistance that I got was people telling me, we're still struggling to empower women and girls. Why are you talking about boys? Why are you talking about, ensuring that boys feel more connected to their communities, or more boys, receive mentorship and all that? Whereas we're still talking about how we can accelerate actions for more girls to be in school and all of that. Until more recently, there seems to be a shift, a drastic shift, because I think there's a huge realization globally about the importance of engaging boys and men right now. And we have all seen that achieving gender equality could be a lot faster if we bring boys and men as part of the solution, other than being framed as, the problem themselves. So that was one of the, the
Okay,
biggest challenges that
excellent.
I had.
Yeah. I mean, there's one thing which I find so amazing. Long before the term toxic masculinity has become in the mainstream, and how to move from toxic to positive masculinity, you've been doing that for like many, many years now. So in many ways, you set a trend, yeah, which is now everyone's talking about that. So congratulations on that. The charity is a lot to do with football as well, because it's a way to engage guys, young boys. So the last question really is, who do you want to see win at this US-hosted World Cup?
I think it has to come to Africa. And I'm not
That's a good answer.
he has to come to Africa. And I think we have had really incredible representation. Egypt is really doing it awesome. And I just do think that somehow it's going to come to Africa. But with what happened yesterday with Messi, I think I'm not so sure, but I'm very hopeful that it's going to come to Africa.
Okay. Well,
Mhm.
we're on your side. Okay. Thank you. David, over to you. Back to you.
No, we invite our guests to share a story, and the idea with the story is something that has inspired you in your professional journey, in your life's work. And we start with asking our guests to share that story, and then we have a conversation about the meaning in it. So let me pass it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I do have two stories to share, but they are all connected. And I would love to talk about my mom, because I think my mom has been a really strong backbone behind who I have grown to become at the moment, and all of the work that I have done in the past years. At the age of 9, I watched my mom, get violated and abused by a gang of three armed young men. It was a robbery attack in our home when this incident happened. And although it's been more than 20 years, but I've not been able to heal totally from that experience. My mom was heavily pregnant when this happened. A couple of weeks after that incident, my mom had complications with the pregnancy that resulted in, consistently bleeding. It also led to losing her and losing the baby as well. I grew up to be an adult and struggled with this all through those years. And like I said earlier, it's been more than 20 years since that experience, but I've not been able to heal totally from that. So one question that experience left me with was, what if these three boys were reached before that incident occurred? Is there a possibility that my mom would have lived up until this moment? I mean, I never can tell. Nobody can. But I think there is a high chance that my mom would still be alive right now. So what I did was, in 2018, I founded Boys Champions, and the intention is to ensure that more women like my mom do not fall victims to violence. And I have two amazing younger sisters who I wouldn't want the same story that, befell my mom to happen to them. And I have been doing this work for almost a decade, and I have seen the work work. I've seen the impact that we're making in the communities that we serve, with the boys that we work. And the second part of the story I wanted to share, which for me is like a success story, is I think 2 years ago, a little boy walked up to me, maybe about 18, 19 years of age. And he mentioned that somebody tapped me behind my back and said, "Hey, can I talk to you for a second?" And I turned back to him and it was like, "Do you remember me?" I said, "No, I don't remember you." He said, "In 2017 stroke 2018, you supported me through a phase that I was going through. And at the moment that I met you, I was contemplating suicide. And because of what you said to me and because of how you held my hand, I did not, ruin my life at that point. Right now, I am in the university studying computer engineering." The story of this young man is one of the stories that I hear almost every single day. It's one out of thousands of stories that I continue to hear every single day. And that is one of the things that encourages me to continue to do this work. Today, I went ahead to study a master's in special education because I wanted to understand how behaviors, especially behavioral disturbances, occur in young men, especially within the classroom setting. And right now, for my PhD, I'm going to concentrate on building on that research to see how adverse childhood experiences can contribute to, how older men show up, in their lives and in work spaces as well. So I have seen my mom's story follow me through, every sphere of every part of my career journey. And that has continued to inspire me even until this moment.
Well,
It's incredibly powerful. I mean, trauma so how old were you when this happened, Noel? What was
I
the,
was I was 9 going to 10.
right. So childhood trauma, you talked about it a little bit at the beginning about childhood trauma and how it affects. What percentage of people do you think have that some trauma in their childhood? Is it a large? I suspect it's a scary percentage that we're just not aware of.
Dr. Osley, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but I would say all of us, surprisingly. And adverse childhood experiences are things like even hunger. There are things even as simple as how you interact with your parents, how parents interact with their children every day. And we do not know that some of these experiences are affecting the children, and how they show up in the classroom. And for different contexts, they could mean different things. For instance, in Nigeria, a lot of children witness their parents fighting in the morning before they go to school. Some children go to school hungry, and you expect that they learn in the classroom with hunger. So it could mean different things for different contexts and settings, but I would say a very scary large percentage.
Noel, you said it's a very large percentage who faced childhood trauma. And I think I would agree with that. I also think it's not only something which is in developing countries. To the contrary, I think you will find it across the globe. My sister is a psychologist and like social worker. And she said, you have no idea what goes on behind the doors of big houses. And, that resonated with me. We believe abuse only happens in a certain context, but I think abuse happens everywhere, in all countries, in all family backgrounds. So I would agree with what you said.
But I suppose maybe I'm being pedantic, but there's a scale here, isn't there? Or maybe I'm thinking about this differently. I mean, what you described, Noel, seems to be an extreme end of trauma. I can't pretend to relate to it because I don't think there's anything in my background that comes close. So I suppose in a way that's the point I was trying to get to. If we take your story, there are so many pieces to point to. The one that I'm immediately fascinated about is your reaction, because I think perhaps my reaction would have been more anger, desire for revenge, retribution, some sense of getting even with the world and with the individuals. Your reaction appears to be more conciliatory, more sense of how do I prevent this from happening again. That feels very laudable and very impressive. But what gave you the grace and the wisdom to be able to get there when I think much of us would go somewhere else?
You see, I think it's a bit of a lot of things. First is the memory of my mom. My mom was one of the most peaceful humans that I have ever met. And one thing that stood out for me growing up was how my mom opened her door to strangers. Particularly, I could remember, so the way my house in the village is built is it's built just along a very busy road. Right. So during the day, my mom, maybe when she's not out, could stay in front of the house and, exchange pleasantries with people who are passing along the road going for their different businesses. And a lot of times I saw my mom call people into the house and tell them, "Oh, just go into the house and grab something to eat." So people that were not known to us, but she made her home accessible to them to just go grab what he needed to eat within the house. So I saw my mom as not just a very charitable, but it also a very humane, kind, empathetic person. And questions that I always ask myself is, what would my mom do in situations like this? Would she be so angry that she would be retaliatory? Would she rather do something to prevent such an occurrence? And I think my mom would have done, and that's what I chose to do. In addition to that, I think I also had a great upbringing that taught me forgiveness other than retaliation and anger. If you would also know, like to know, I went to a seminary. I wanted to become a Catholic priest at some point, right? And that was because I wanted to touch lives. I wanted to be able to contribute towards bringing people back to God, or, showing God's mercy in a more vivid manner. So all of those experiences shaped me, and they all helped me become who I am and to do the work the way I do that at this moment.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the amazing thing is we talked about that before, and it always surprised me how from a very early age onwards, you acknowledge that there was trauma rather than ignore it. You also did many things in your life that were really coping with it, acknowledging, coping, addressing it. And I think everything in your career path was really to do with that, just coping and dealing with it. And from your experience, how many of the world population, the kids of the world, actually have this ability or know how to deal with trauma, cope with trauma, develop mechanisms to heal? Because I think that's what you're going to do, or what you're doing with Boys Champions in many ways.
Yeah. So after my master's in the US, I decided to really work with district schools in America to understand what the dynamics in the US looked like. And a lot of times while I was with one of the district schools, so many times that we heard about shooting happen. It might not necessarily be in our own district school, but another one. But the fear that gripped a lot of children within our own district was enormous. And these were traumatic experiences. In my work as well at Boys Champions, almost all the boys that we support, especially those who are receiving direct support from us, have one form of trauma or the other, right? So I am seeing a huge number grow up with these experiences. But I want to talk about the work that I do with Boys Champions, because that is what the platform that enables me engage more, closely with these boys. So we have designed a Boys to Men program in such a way that we factored all of these experiences. So it's a holistic approach that addresses all of these experiences, from the adverse childhood experiences, from what happens within their immediate environment, from what happens within the school and families. We try to engage them so they can build resilience, heal from these experiences, and be able to take actions themselves as well to ensure that they do not just mitigate these experiences from occurring in the future, but they are also ensuring they're preventing that from even happening to the people around them as well. So our programs that are curriculum based, by the way, are helping the boys to build resilience and also heal from that experiences. And we're working with different therapists, different mental health professionals who understand trauma and how to navigate that, who are supporting the boys through our.
I think I'm compelled to make a very awkward transition or a very awkward comparison, but give me a little rope and maybe you can give me some wisdom on this, Noel. I have worked with professionals in the workplace that carry petty grudges because they've been slighted about not getting promoted, or someone didn't include them on an email that they should have been included on. And I contrast their anger and righteousness at being left off of something with the people that you're working with that have had genuinely scarring experiences in their youth or in their adult life, who seem to have the ability to look beyond the damage that was caused to create something better for everyone, not just right their wrong, but play it forward, if you will, for want of a better description. This is, in a way, why I struggle a little bit with the extremities of if it's possible for someone like your own experience to be able to move beyond the trauma to do something impactful beyond yourself, bigger than yourself. How is it that in professional life, silly things seem to be carried by people for far too long and actually, in a way, probably detrimentally affect them? In some ways, I feel that professionals just carry this load of grudges as a big bag on their back as they go forward and they don't let it go. Is there it's an uneasy comparison, but is there a comparison between the two?
Um, there is, and one thing I would like to mention here is that unmitigated stress would always show up in our adults' lives, and we can also remove the power of professional help for some of these experiences. All through our journeys, there are certain experiences that we have that require professional help to be able to get through or to get by. But most of the times, we do not even think they are important to be addressed. And we see them show up in workplaces, like some of the things that you described, and in other areas of our lives as well. So definitely, adverse childhood experiences are real, and they will always show up in our professional life and settings if they are not addressed. And again, my case could be different. I have received a series of help in addition to the work that I do. And the work that I do is quite healing for me. It could be different for other people. And that's why, because of that, we have also seen the how people with lived experiences could also even do this work better. So right now within the organization, almost like 60% of those who are working with us are people with lived experiences who have seen the need to apply these experiences into ensuring that those type of experiences do not happen, because they have come to self-realization through professional help. They've also come to see the impact that or the change that it could bring through their experiences. But for somebody who is in a work setting or a professional setting who has not really undergone any kind of professional support or help, would not even realize the importance that his lived experience brings into his professional life, or what damage that could also do. So it is that support, and then it is also the realization that that support brings that helps improves this as well.
Yeah, I mean, David, I think it was interesting that you brought in the corporate dimension, because there's one thing which really impressed me very much about Noel all the time: his ability to lead a conversation, engage people in conversation, being non-judgmental, being a brilliant listener. And when you told the story about the young man who asked you and told you how much you helped him some years ago with conversation support, what do you see occurring in society, in America, in Nigeria, across the world? Yeah, the power of conversations. Because I think for me that's one of the big missing in today's time, especially in the Western world, in the rich world, in America and Europe, that people don't take the time anymore to really listen and just engaging a conversation. It doesn't always have to be a therapist. Sometimes the right question at the right time might actually go a long way.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. And some of the things I'm seeing, especially through this work, is that people, the world is growing apart all the more. The world is also becoming very polarized in a whole lot of ways, and we're beginning to pay more attention to what divides us rather than what unites us. So people have become more judgmental. People have also grown apart to the point that they do not know who to trust to initiate conversations with. And as a result, even in workplaces, you don't know who to talk to because you never can tell who could use this against you tomorrow. And because of that, a lot of people would prefer to bottle this up and keep them inside of them when just a simple conversation could help, unload a lot of things or help you solve a huge problem. So I do think it's how the world is becoming. But regardless, there's always one person that you can count on, right? One of the things that I do with my friends, I have a group of friends, about 5 of us, that we're all young men who are work in progress at this point. And what we do when we have, maybe each of us, any of us might have something that would want to share with somebody. It could be a situation that is, bothering you, and all you just need to do is just a text message. Do you have a minute? And once I get a message from my friend that says you have a minute, I know this is something that requires my attention and requires my listening. And I right away call the person to hear what the person, and most often than not, this person unloads all their worries. And most often than not, they just want you to listen to them and not even offer solution to that. So we all should find 1 or 2 persons that we could always reach out to and ask if they do have a minute, because I think that is really very important.
I want to pick up on that theme of conversation a little bit. I want to pick up on this theme that there's a glorification, certainly in professional life, and I think in other aspects of life, of the individual. The Machiavellian tactics to get somewhere, to achieve something, to get a title, to dominate a domain. And that appears to be playing out in politics. It appears to be playing out in professional life. Helmut and I have been talking about this next book that we're writing, and talking about the things that go wrong in professional life very often are the irrationality of human behavior. A lot of that irrationality comes down to self-justifications for something that you feel that you need or deserve, and a lack of collective empathy. I want this and I don't necessarily care if it causes damage to others. I find having conversations with people who have this incredible ability to recontextualize the damage that's caused by that, by talking about, there was this incredibly traumatic thing that happened in my life, and rather than seek vengeance, I sought to make the whole thing better. It sort of, it makes everything else feel more trivial. It recontextualizes these, as I say, I go back to my word petty, these petty battles that we carry with us. But what would your advice be? So if we're sitting in front of someone who's trying to pursue professional life and they feel that they're in an environment where everyone's out to get what they can for themselves, they're all grabbing as much of the cake as they can, don't necessarily care what damage is being caused to the whole. How do you reverse that? How do you rise above it and not become a victim of it?
Yeah, that's a great question right there, Dr. Osley. And it's hard because of our human frailty, right? But I think it's all about really what forms really your very essence. What is motivating you? What motivates you? What do you desire? What do you really want to achieve? Who do you want to become? Do you want to become like every other person who could do all sort of things to get to the next step for them? Or are you one of those who would say the end justifies the means? Or are you one of those who would say, yeah, I do care about the means to the end? So I do think it's about who you are and what also defines success for you. Does success mean that however I achieve that doesn't really matter? Does success also mean that am I going to be happy if I have everything and, had actually trampled on every other person around me in order to get that? So I do think it's about being able to also ask ourselves all these questions to be able to arrive at the very foundation and essence of who you are and what you really want to become. For me, I do not, I think I just want to make impact in the world. I'm more concerned about the legacy that I leave behind. So, and I'm not thinking about, I don't want to become the next Elon Musk. I don't want to become the next Dangote of Africa. I just want to be able to ensure that I'm rallying other people as I'm making change happen in my community. I'm also rallying other people, other young people, to see the importance of creating change within communities as well. And that for me is the very essence for my existence. So understanding what is actually the very essence for your existence and knowing how to navigate all of these things that you're going to actually meet on your way towards achieving that, the good, the bad, and ensuring that you're focused on that which drives you. I think that should be the concern of every um, person within the professional setting or even in life generally.
Yeah, let me hand it back to Helmet. But I think the point that you make here is that the cost of doing or carrying the pettiness is not immediately obvious, but there is a cost. And I think people forget that they are drawing on a bank balance that ultimately is going to has to get paid at some stage. Helmet, what are your thoughts?
Well, for me, it's one thing I've been thinking about. One question you asked at the very beginning of this podcast and said, what if, what if these three boys had never entered the house of my mother? What would it have taken, to prevent this terrible attack, And I think this is a really good question. What if we could prevent things? Our world is wired to, there's always enough money, time, resources if a crisis starts. But there's never enough money, time, attention, focus, time for conversations to prevent terrible things happening, And that was basically your starting statement, and that really, really resonated with me because that's the source of so much good in this world if you achieve that. So that's my thinking. I've not figured out what to do, but maybe you have some ideas how we could make that a global movement to avoid disaster, to have the conversations before, to make resources available before disaster strikes.
It is that time that I'm going to start to bring us to wrap it up, however. So I was going to give time, Noel, just to give a quick response there and then hand it to Helmet to ask his question. So Noel, quick. I'm sure Helmet's question is such an easy one to answer that you've got just a 3-word answer to it.
Hint, hint. Keep it brief.
I think one of my professors will always tell me that the questions are more important than the answers. And the questions are usually for me the clarion call towards figuring out what could work and figuring out what are the dynamics and also the context that we are. But I do think that what you said, Helmut, about being able to ask these questions and to find solutions to prevent some of these issues that we're experiencing in our world today is really very critical. And yeah, just thinking about the work that I've done with Boys Champions and how this is really helping shape the landscape for gender equality in Africa has shown me that it is important to really be proactive and think prevention rather than we do support for issues when they occur.
Helmet, your
Yeah,
big question.
it's just a fine question, and it's probably oversimplifying, but if I had to give one tip to a young person in this time and age, what would it be? And secondly, is there anything specifically for young guys, a tip you would give them?
I think for me, it would be prioritizing human connection now more than ever. Human connection is so powerful, whether in our professional or in our personal lives. So I think as young people, also as young professionals, we should prioritize human connection, find mentors, and find people that you would always be ready and open to having conversations just about everything. These days, we're seeing a lot of people have conversations with some language models, ChatGPT, and all of that, more than we have conversations with real humans. But I think it shouldn't be the case. So, yeah.
Excellent.
Very well said. We get to a point of the podcast, I'm afraid, where we make this observation that we could continue having a conversation, such an engaging, I think wise beyond anything else, that it would be lovely to keep going. But there is a limit to how much we can put into one podcast episode. So perhaps we need to revisit this conversation at some stage and do a take two. But Noel, thank you for your story. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you for inspiring us once again and having a similar effect as you had when I first met you, and it sounds like when Helmut first met you. Any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience? How can they find out more about the foundation that you're working with?
I think just visit boyschampions.org to learn more and to be part of what we're doing as well. So thank you, Dr. Huxley and Dr. Schuster, for the opportunity.
Thank you. Helmut, anything more from you before I do a final wrap?
A very big thank you, and it's a privilege, a true privilege knowing you, Noel.
Thank you. So it would be remiss of me not to remind everyone that there are 28 other podcast episodes out there. If you haven't checked them out, please do so. This is certainly one of the highlights in terms of podcasts that we've done over the last year and a half. If you like the podcast, Helmut's very keen for me to reinforce that you will absolutely, he guarantees, love the books that we've written. There are 3 books out there at the moment. We're in the process of book 4 and potentially book 5, depending on how you want to think about it. But there's a couple of other books in the pipeline that we're hoping to share. Our social media content and our newsletter in particular is something that we very much enjoy putting out there. Last month's newsletter talks about the job market for graduates and thinking about how they can get a job or think about overcoming some of the obstacles that seem to be in their path this year, in particular with the state of the economy and the state of big businesses. So intended to be useful, but also entertaining. And I was trying to think LinkedIn as well as our Instagram content, which is a lot of fun. So please check those out. I'll give you some links here in the end of this podcast. But our time is about up. So I will say goodbye. Thank you. And it's, what do we say, Helmut? It's goodbye from me and it's Auf Wiedersehen from you.
Auf Wiedersehen und Servus from
Okay.
Österreich.
And what would the Nigerian equivalent be?
So I think it could be different things because Nigeria has over 250 languages. But for the Igbo part of the Nigerian community, I think it's Kachifu.
Perfect. Okay. Let's bring it to an end. Bye-bye, everyone.